lovely, and it's lovely for all of you to be able to join us. When I was asked to moderate this panel, and they told me who was going to be on this panel, I was totally fangirling. Because, you know, Dawn is one of the first Black people to have ever reached the deepest depths of the ocean in Marianas Trench. And then Aulani has played a critical role in establishing one of the largest marine protected areas in Hawaii. In the world, but based in Hawaii. So we're really, really fortunate to be hearing from these two lovely individuals, and I get to ask some cool questions. So thank you. So to start, you know, we've heard a lot, I think, about solutions that, you know, the community here is trying to come up with, you know, that address conservation, revitalization of our natural world. And how, though, should we center the ocean in these solutions that we're trying to come up with? You know, maybe Aulani, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, it's just such a pleasure to be here talking about the ocean. How can we be talking about climate without talking about the ocean? So, you know, let's start. I mean, the ocean and atmosphere really are one big fluid mass, completely connected, right? The ocean is, you know, really is what created all life on the planet, and it drives all living systems on Earth. So, you know, when we think about climate, we often think about the atmosphere and we think about the impacts that are happening above water. But those impacts that we're experiencing on land are really because of the impacts that have already occurred and are continuing to occur in the ocean, right? So, like, simply put, climate change is ocean change. And if we want to stabilize the planet, we have to stabilize the ocean. I don't mean to make it so simple, but really, that's clear. And we need to do that, of course, by reducing carbon and other greenhouse gases, right? So we can stay in those globally agreed upon targets that have been set. But we also need to take the pressure off, the wrong type of pressure off of the ocean, right? The ocean has already been quite literally taking the heat from global warming, right? 90% of all the warming and about a third of all the carbon that's been released across the decades have been absorbed by the ocean. And science is telling us that the ocean can do even more, right? Things like restoring coastal and ocean systems, really carbon-rich systems that we know they are, could provide maybe even a fifth, right? 20% of the carbon capture that's required to get those numbers that we've been talking about down, right? And maybe even more, but only if we are not, again, over-pressuring the system so that it can't provide those things that we want. And it's why, really, in order to do these kinds of things, explore things like carbon capture through restoration, the Biden administration is working on an ocean climate action plan, right? And why? To basically identify what else could be possible out there, prioritize what those might be, and then what might sound boring but is incredibly important is coordinate across all of the government. And that's a big job in and of itself, right? To see what possibly can be done. And in the US or globally, right, none of this can really happen without incredible focus and investment. And it's not just in the science and tech, right? Not that that stuff's the easy stuff, it's important and it's hard, but also in creating the markets, right? In figuring out the appropriate finance mechanisms and looking at how do we actually develop the appropriate supply chains, all of that kind of stuff, right? The market potential in really looking at these ocean solutions, these ocean climate solutions, is really big. And, you know, humanity's really relying on that potential in order for us to be able to have a livable planet.
Absolutely.
I would love to add to that. Everybody take a deep breath. Exhale. 50% of that oxygen comes from the ocean. Yes. So the ocean not only is buying us valuable time in terms of the whole climate change crisis that we're battling, as Aulani just pointed out here, but it's essential for our well-being regardless of where we live on this planet. It's not just for coastal communities or islanders. All three of us here are island women. It's for everyone. And one of my good friends is Peter Domenical. He is the director of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts. And he says that we just are not going to be able to get to these climate objectives without the ocean. We cannot get there without the ocean. And that includes the investment, the climate tech investment from venture capital. One of the things that I just found out, I'm a scientist, I'm not a financier or an economist, but I just found out that among all of the billions of dollars that are being invested venture capital-wise in climate tech, less than 1% of that is in the ocean, despite what the ocean is giving us, despite the fact that 71% of the planet is ocean. This is an ocean planet. So my friend Peter, he and his friends at Propeller Venture Capital just announced last week $100 million of venture capital funding in the ocean. And so that is starting right now. It's going to start with a partnership between Propeller and Woods Hole Oceanographic, but other startups, including at Mbari, Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, are welcome. So this is huge news. I was expecting to hear applause, so thank you. $100 million is not trivial. It's a very good start.
That's fantastic news. I have not heard about that either. So lots and lots of opportunity in the ocean, and clearly we already get so much from it. Another topic that I would love to talk about is exploration and mapping, which I know this is something that Don has been involved with for several years. And how do you think these new expeditions or new approaches will help us to center the ocean in these climate solutions that the community is trying to come up with?
Well, it's really hard to understand or protect something that we have not mapped in totality. All of the numbers that Aulani gave you in terms of what we know, how much time the ocean is buying us in terms of absorbing carbon dioxide and 90% of the heat, all of that comes from a global observation network of robots and sensors in the ocean. And that continues to grow. The numbers of those sensors grows every day. In fact, what's happening now is that these sensors are going to be more sustainable in terms of not littering the ocean with more of this human influence, but the ability for them to come back and then to go back. And that was one of the most exciting things that happened to me this summer, because we are now able to reach the deepest part of the ocean with robots, but also with our human perception. We are able to go. And I was able to dive to 6.7 miles depth into Challenger Deep, the deepest part of the Mariana Trench, the deepest part in the ocean, as Kakani mentioned. What do you think the first thing we saw there was? It was a beer bottle. It was very, very disheartening. We saw, it was just in the first couple of minutes, and we saw amazing things afterwards, and we also mapped that remotest part of the ocean with a special sonar instrument, because we only have about 23.4% of the global ocean floor mapped. So this is essential. It is wonderful to think about the stars and to think about the moon and Mars. All of that is wonderful, but we have got to get a handle on our own planet. It is still our only planet. And thank you. And so this mapping is essential, and all three of us have been involved in mapping projects which continue.
Yeah, Aulani, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what Don's talking about, right? We've all heard that statistic. We know more about the moon, the surface of the moon, than the ocean, and that is changing thanks to people like Don that are pushing on that and also bringing that human perception, right? How do we match? And it relates to the conversation that we were having yesterday, right? About bringing in the people side of all of this. How do we do that? And really, because this is changing, because it needs to change quickly, we think about, well, what kind of science do we need, right? Well, if we want to do to some of these tech solutions, right? If we want to actually tackle climate, then we need monitoring, right? How do we know what the ocean's doing for sequestering? How can we realize that 20% potentially or more of carbon capture? What might be happening to the biodiversity if we're doing that? We need to monitor all of that, right? We also need to go to these places. It's not just cool to go to the deepest part of the ocean. It's actually necessary, right? How do we understand these parts of the ocean that we really don't, so that we don't make decisions in the future or even now without fully understanding what might be then irreversible decisions that are created that could have been avoidable, right? And if you're thinking about, technologies that we want to do offshore wind or energy development, or we want to site a clean aquaculture facility, we need to know about bathymetry, right? We need to understand what's on the floor. So this science is not only cool and important because we don't know it, but it's super practical. Right? If we think about what are the best solutions, what I love about this gathering, and it's my first Verge conference, right, is that we're talking about solutions. And what are the best solutions? In my opinion, it's when imagination meets evidence, right? And you need both. And you can get those both from the kind of data and the visualization, products and tools, and you can get it at the bottom of the ocean and looking. And whether it's sad to see that bottle, it also is going to drive us to think about how does that not happen, kind of moving forward, right? And I think, bottom line is we need these solutions now. Never before has humanity faced this confluence of crises that we find ourselves in. So never before has really there been the driving need for us to really bring these kinds of necessary solutions together that create the solutions without causing more harm.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And, something I do want to add too is, the number, the 20 or 25% of the ocean bottom that has been mapped at the same level of detail as, the moon and Mars. That's something we commonly think about, we talk about, but then the ocean is this massive volume. It represents 97% of the habitable volume on this planet. And taken in concert, we've only probably seen about 1% of that. Yeah. So it's the paucity, right, of the knowledge that we have about this place is also a big challenge. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I think we're going to go to the sidebar and try and grab a question from over there.
Yeah, so thank you for this really amazing conversation so far. So the ocean serves as potentially a resource for all the materials and minerals that we need to power the clean economy. So what's your take on that? And I think we want to start with Don.
Yeah, that's a very good question in terms of the so-called seabed mining. And there is potential on the seabed for copper, manganese, cobalt, and nickel, not so much for lithium. But I think there's consensus in the scientific community that we need to go very slowly on this, and in many areas we need to pause, because we've just given you the statistics in terms of how little we know about the ocean, how little we know about the seabed. And we would just like a bit more time to characterize and to understand that environment before we dive in, pun intended, to mine these areas. We don't know the consequences yet. We need these studies. There's also evidence that with ocean trawling for fishing, that is kicking up on the seabed the equivalent of the global aviation industry in terms of carbon dioxide emissions. So we want to be very careful there. That is a published study by colleagues of ours from the National Geographic. And so we just need to take it slow, is I think the consensus of the scientific community. And also, with regard to lithium, there are some very interesting solutions that are on our doorstep. For instance, I live near the Salton Sea, which is a place that is environmentally in much trouble, but if handled properly, the Salton Sea could provide all of the US supply of lithium just from that one site, if we are able to handle the geothermal extraction properly. If we can extract lithium from existing geothermal energy plants, from those brines, and then also to create low salinity ponds for the birds and other species to recover in the Salton Sea. That is one answer that we would really, we being scientists, would like to see pursued, and it is being pursued right now with state funds, a budget surplus of state funds. So that's my take.
Aulani, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Maybe just briefly that, any use of marine resources, right, it's complicated. It's complicated environmentally, it's complicated from social justice issues, from sovereignty issues, and, the list goes on. And it's, when we talk about essential or important minerals and metals, it's really no different, particularly when demand is continuing to increase. So, how might we, right, the types of entrepreneurial questions that get asked, how might we look at reducing our demand, right? How can tech change and evolve so that what we're producing, right, actually uses less or different things, right? We never had the things we're using now that are requiring these. So what might we be able to do differently? And do we really have a handle on how much of these metals and minerals, well, that's a new word, are already out there that might be reused or recycled? And how do we look at the investments in being able to do that? And in the list that the Secretary of Energy just talked about, right, this administration is investing in things like earth minerals and metals recycling, and looking at investments in new battery tech to take some of that pressure off. And then, Don talked about new science and things that we're learning, like what might be happening when we're trawling the bottom. Some science also has come out recently that talks about the first meter of the seafloor alone has more carbon, is holding more carbon than all terrestrial soils combined. Right, so that it might be prudent for us to think about, how do we make sure that we're not, in the effort to reduce our carbon or carbon capture elsewhere, developing and using machinery or tech that requires us to disturb it, where it's, pretty firmly in place at the moment.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And we're running out of time, unfortunately, but any advice you might want to give to people who would like to work in this space or center the ocean in their solutions, maybe?
Propellervc.com.
Check that out. Mm-hmm. And then,
yeah. I would think that, if there's one thing to think about in terms of ocean climate solutions, that, we're writing the rules right now. So it might be like the early days of the internet, right? That if you can bring or create a venture that delivers solutions that can not only deliver goods to people and society, but protects the future of the ocean and the future of really life on the planet, right? You're going to be at the governance table right away, right now, right? And that's super important, right? The question isn't really, can the ocean help to deliver some of these solutions? We know already that it can. The question is really how, right? How can those solutions be delivered responsibly, equitably, delivered to people, for one thing? We just had a big conversation about that. And also, how can we do that? How can we build on what the ocean can deliver, but do it in a way that doesn't cause more harm? That's really the challenge that's out there, right? But again, the market potential is out there, and we really need to figure this out.
Yeah, well, incredible. Well, thank you to Don Wright and Aulani Wilhelm for their input.
Thank you, Kakani.